Okay, so I'm just looking at tacking this lower cross member into place, and once that gets set up, I'm going to try to keep it as square as possible, so I'm kind of taking a couple different measurements, and once that's done I'm going to move on to the forks. So I got the cross member tacked into place. I'm going to come back to that. Just moving on to the forks. My wife is going to come out and actually help me weld these because I want them to be really strong, and she had some different ideas about how to go about this. I was just going to overlap over both pieces, but see, she suggested putting a plate on the inside, and then she'd be able to run welds to the plate and then fill it in. So I mean, that's above my skill level, but she's a really good welder, so I'm gonna trust her on this one. So I'm just doing some dry fitting here. My real concern is making sure the distance back to the transmission cradle is right, and also there is a little bit of movement up and down. I want to make sure that's kind of as close as I can get it. I've got a pretty good idea of where it needs to be, so I'm just checking some diagrams that I got off the internet that show some of the measurements, and I took some measurements before I started hacking up the original back end here. So it's kind of a situation where you want to like measure 10 times and weld once, so it's taking a long time to get this fit up. Okay, so I'm just working on these horns. Last night my wife welded both sides, and there's probably a 1/2 inch gap here, and she was able to just weave the weld and fill it in. I mean, I would have had a heck of a time doing that myself, but she pulled it off no problem. So I have a 1 inch gap between the lower cross member and the bottom part of the fork. That's just from where I cut it out with the plasma cutter and then cleaned up the edges. So I'm just going to fill these voids in with sheet metal and just tack it in place. There's a little bit of a crack left here. I filled that in already. So yeah, we're kind of moving ahead pretty quick with this project. You know, I really want to get this thing, the chassis, banged out and finished. You know, my goal right now is like May. I'm looking at May, so it gives me another like 2 months, which I think should be plenty of time. What I need to do, finish the horns. I got to put the bottom on the tunnel, which is very straightforward. I need to deal with the parking brake area. I'm getting a replacement piece for that from Thing Parts, so that's going to get welded on. Got to rebuild the front end, but that's already in the works. I've already started a lot of that, so it should come together pretty quickly. Mount the transmission, the swing axles, the engine, the floor pans, but that'll be pretty easy. So I think I should be on track to have this thing painted, and I'm going to do the POR 15 on the bottom, and maybe the floor pans, and then the rest of it's going to get primed and painted, probably matte black. So that's a small little patch in there. And then we get down, and the fit wasn't right. A bit of a gap there, and a bit of a gap down in here. So I'm gonna try to fill that with the welder. I'm gonna try to weave across that and fill it up. We'll see what's the worst that can happen. Okay, spent a few hours in the morning, had a buddy come and help me, and we did the fuel line. So it just starts at the frame head. There's an opening there. There's a rubber gasket that goes around it here. And then it makes its way down the tunnel. There's a clip here. And then it comes down, goes into the fork, and comes out the top of the fork. So I had to fabricate a new clip here. It was so rusted out on the back end here that there was just nothing. So I can only assume that there was some sort of other mounting point along the way. I actually think it may have been bundled up with the rest of these tubes as well at some point. But you need these kind of retaining clips just to keep it from rattling around. So that is done. I've got to replace this bushing for the shift linkage. And I want to do a coat of paint on the inside, and once that is done, I'm going to add the bottom of the tunnel and seal it all up. I got so many different things on the go. Last night I made this plate here to cover the back of the tunnel, and there's two rubber gaskets that go right there, and there's another gasket that goes here, and the transmission linkage goes through. And I had put some Bondo on the top here. There were some rotted out spots, and then you know what, I decided I'm just gonna make a brand new plate. That way I got a good place to put a bead here, and it'll just be a little nicer looking. So I'm gonna work on that a little bit later. And I'm doing some painting today. There's the beam. I had primed it. Now I got a coat of paint on there. And see, these are some the brake drums and the front end parts. This is what I'm using. Roll bar and chassis, and I'm also using high temp caliper paint for the brake parts. Okay, it's time to start looking at these floor pans. So plan of attack is there's not really a straight edge on the outside here where these were manufactured. It's all kind of a jagged. So I'm just kind of straightening it up, and I took some measurements and I kind of fit it in place, and you can see where it needs to be trimmed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim a little bit off at a time and keep fitting it, trim it, fit it, trim it, just so I don't accidentally take off too much material.